Hi. This week we are going to be talking about media audiences. And the first thing that you will immediately notice is I've taken the title of the lecture from this week's key reading, which is about what we can learn about the impact of Hollywood on young women in the early part of the 20th century by looking at the scrapbooks that they kept. And to me, it's a fascinating piece of research because it represents an innovative approach to research methods that gets at one of the most important themes in media research, which is how people come to have a consciousness of and begin to engage with their social circumstances through interacting with media. So, this is a really important concept that we need to understand because what it does is it helps us get beyond fairly simplistic ideas about media effects. To me, it's quite natural when we come to thinking about the impact of media to think about questions concerning how media make people think this or do that. And quite often it's easy to fall into fairly simplistic ideas about the relationship between media exposure and action. Because I suppose that's one of the ways that our culture tends to think about things. We often wonder if media violence makes people violent or if sexist media representations are directly responsible for provoking real world sexism. And I suppose there is a kind of a relationship between those things, but it really is important that we begin to think of media effects in more long-term guises regarding the issue of socialization. So, what I want to get to today is going through a series of ideas that will help contextualize the reading, help explain why I'm asking you to do it. Why are we interested in how young women made sense of movies in the early 20th century? Why are we interested in the fact that they kept scrapbooks about their movie stars? Well, we're interested in those things because they indicate how those young women were placed in a certain position by the history around them, the circumstances around them, and also how they began to try and find their own place in the world by kind of fighting back against some of those ideas. And so, what this introduces us to is the idea that when we're talking about media audiences, in significant ways, what we're interested in is how people become socialized into certain ways of thinking about the world, but also how they begin to find their own voice in terms of saying the things, the political things that they want to say about the world that they live in, and how media become involved in the steps that people take to exercise some kind of control over their cultural circumstances. So, what we can see is that the issue of media audiences, how to study them, why to study them, is far more complicated than the question of will showing this advertisement to a particular audience make them want to buy my product. Um, it simply isn't that straightforward. It just isn't, and I'd be misleading you if I were to suggest that it was. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a series of ideas that help explain, particularly the logic and the goals of qualitative audience research and how it relates to other forms of study. And what we're going to be doing is going through four steps. And in these four steps, we're going to be seeing how, historically speaking, women have always been at the forefront of thinking about what audience research is for and what audience research tells us about the social power of media. And so, what I want to do is think not so much about particular media forms as broader forms of, I suppose, communication processes. And the first thing that we're going to do is discuss how research on media audiences reflects an interest that crosses the humanities and particularly crosses into cultural history. And this concerns the relationship between culture and conflict. How is it that within a particular historical place and time, different groups struggle over the meaning of life, for want of a better word? How is it that people take up different kinds of symbolic activities to present different ideas about how life is and how it should be led? The next thing I'm going to be doing is, when I've got there a category called no magic bullets, I'm going to be explaining why the question that no one ever saw the question of media effects in direct terms. You might have heard of media effects discussed as in terms of magic bullets or hypodermic needles. And the thing we need to understand is that no one ever thought that media had the power to completely overcome audiences, no matter who they were, what they were, what they thought, or anything like that. And that people always thought that media influence was quite a complicated thing that involved the interaction between media and the social circumstances of the audiences who they served. The third idea we're going to talk about is a concept called resistance, and this is an idea that begins to emerge from qualitative audience researchers in the early 1980s that talks about the way that people begin to use popular culture content to come up with some quite radical ideas about social change, about how society could work in a different way. So that's quite important to the reading from this week. And through engaging with the concept of resistance, we will also see how the reading from this week on fan scrapbooks also represents a series of themes and ideas and methods that are quite common across media research. So this will be an important part of helping us understand how the particular reading for this week represents to a whole line of thought that's very visible in media research. And then finally, we're going to be talking about enduring themes in audience research, and I'm going to be explaining how some of the ideas in the reading this week on early 20th century film audiences and activities of scrapbooking, again, seems like quite an esoteric, quite niche kind of topic. It isn't at all. We're going to be talking about how it represents ideas and themes that we've been able to find across at least 50 years of feminist research on women and media audiences. And all of that will place you in a good position at the end to understand why we do qualitative media research and how qualitative media research allows us to make the connection between media use and political socialization. So that's what we're doing this week.